The topic this evening is releasing terrorists and redeeming captives. It's a very important issue because the government right now is in negotiations to release more terrorists for the bodies of 2 IDF soldiers and 2 Israeli citizens, one Ethiopian and one a Bedouin. Okay, so if we're going to start out with a Parsha of the week, the Devar Torah, this coming Parsha is Chukat, and there's a captive situation here in this week's Parsha. So all of you can use it to bring up this subject at your Shabbat table. My name is Menachem Gottlieb, and you see my email on the source sheet. Feel free to write to me, ask me any questions. If you want more information, if you want more sources, if you want the entire source, just write to me. Okay, we're starting with source 1, Numbers chapter 21. Sentence 1. The Canaanite king of Arad, who lived in the south, heard that Israel had come by the route of the spies. And he waged war against Israel and took from them a captive. 2, Israel made a vow to the Lord and said, if you deliver this people into my hand, I will destroy or consecrate their cities. They prayed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, give us this enemy into our hands and we will destroy the cities. We will also consecrate, because the word haramti, as you see over here in Hebrew, has a double meaning. It means to completely destroy. It also means that whatever we find there will be for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Usually, when a person goes to war, there's a lot of goodies out there that he could take. Gold, silver, property, that's part of the booty that entices soldiers to go to war. But here we said, no, we don't want anything. Everything will be for you. Will be for the Beit HaMikdash, for the Mishkan. In this case, it was the Mishkan. 3, the Lord heard Israel's voice and delivered the Canaanite. He destroyed them and consecrated their cities, and he called the place Hormah, from cherem, from the word to consecrate or to destroy. Who was this captive that was taken? Rashi explains, Vayash mimenu shevi, eno ela shifcha achat, and took them a captive. It was only a single maidservant. Rashi says, it was just a maidservant, a shifcha Canaanite. Now, a shifcha Canaanite is not like a non-Jew. She has a certain status, and she has to keep certain mitzvahs. She has a higher status than a non-Jew. And that's who they captured. It wasn't even a full-fledged Jew. The Jewish people went to war and destroyed them. And that was the policy of Moshe Rabbeinu in the good old days. If somebody would take a captive, they would go to war. Avraham Avinu did the same thing with Lot. Lot was captured. He went to war. You have the same thing in the book of Shmuel. David HaMelech had 400 soldiers when he was in Philistine territory. He took his men to a battle. And while he did that, all the wives and his wives were left behind, and Amalek came and captured all of them. He found out, he pursued them, went to battle against them, rescued his women. source 3. 1980, till the Shalit deal, 179 Israelis were murdered by terrorists that were released in previous deals. That is what the screenshot I had on before, but I want to show it to you again. See all these people here? 179 people murdered by terrorists before the Shalit deal. By terrorists that were released already, that were in Israeli prisons. And because Hamas captured a few soldiers or dead bodies or whatever, they were released. And these people that you see in front of you, they were all murdered by terrorists that we released to go back and to continue their profession of murdering Jews. This gets me angry. It got me angry at the time. I'm still angry. Okay, continue. Shalit, Gilad Shalit, was captured and held captive for 5 years and 4 months by Palestinian militants. A deal was reached between Israel and Hamas to release Shalit in exchange for 1,027 Palestinian and Israeli Arab prisoners, terrorists. The deal was brokered by German and Egyptian mediators and signed in Egypt on October 11, 2011. After they knew that 179 Jews from 1980 and on were already murdered by released terrorists, they decided they're going to release another 1,027. What happened after they released that 1,027? The Shabak reported that attempted kidnappings went up 4 times. And 10 Jews so far have been murdered by those terrorists that were released in the Shalit deal. Since the Shalit deal, 10 Israelis have been murdered by terrorists, released for Shalit, including the 3 teenagers that we all remember, Eyal Yifrach, Gilad Shaar, and Naftali Frankel, who were hitchhiking home from school on June 12, 2014. 150 of those released terrorists went back to terrorism. These 3 boys paid the price, and their families, because of these released terrorists. The man who masterminded this plot to kidnap and kill these boys lived in Hebron. He was one of the released terrorists in the Shalit deal. Now, let's go on to the Gemara, because the Gemara and Chazal understood this problem very well. And it's very clear in the halacha that we don't do such a thing. Unfortunately, it's being ignored or pushed aside. But let's go back to the original sources and see what Chazal said. First of all, we have a Mishnah in Gemara Gittin. I'm going to read this in Hebrew because important. Ein podin et hashvuyim yeter al kidei dinehem. We do not redeem captives more than their value. What does that mean? A person is taken captive. Now, this was common for many hundreds, maybe thousands of years, that people were kidnapped. It still goes on. People were kidnapped by pirates for economic reasons. Let's say they would capture a whole boat, or they would capture a certain area, and then they would sell them as for slaves. So Chazal say the rule is we will not redeem a captive for more than the going rate. If the going rate is, let's say say $10,000 a person, so we pay no more than 10,000. We're not paying more than 10,000. That's what an average person, let's say, in his condition, is worth. Why do we do that? As I'll say, mivnei tikon olam, for the betterment of the world, or for the safety of society. Okay. The Mishnah continues on to another subject, not our subject. Now I'll read it in English. Mishnah. The captives are not redeemed for more than their actual monetary value for the betterment of the world. That's a Mishnah. So the Gemara discusses this idea now. Why? What's the reasoning for Tikkun Olam? What's the reason behind this mitzvah of not redeeming a captive for more than they're worth? The Gemara raises two possibilities. Let's see. Gemara. We're on source 5. A dilemma was raised before the sages with regard to this expression. For the betterment of the world, is it due to? What are the two possibilities? 1. A. The financial pressure of the community. Is the concern that the increase in price will lead to the community assuming financial pressures it will not be able to manage? Meaning, the Jew is captured. The community tries to save him. If they're going to pay more than $10,000 for each person, it'll be too much on the community, too much financial pressure. There's a story that Rav Hershel Schachter says in one of his YU lectures that Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, Rav Chaim of Brisk, who was born in 1853 in Europe, one Erev Yom Kippur, when people came to shul for Kol Nidre, he said, listen, a Jew has just been captured. Everybody go home and bring back a certain amount of money. Everybody's required to bring back a certain amount of money. Forget about Yom Kippur right now. We have to redeem this person and we need money. Rav Chaim of Brisk pushed out Yom Kippur and had the people go home and get their money and bring it back to the Beit Knesset to redeem this prisoner. That is an example of pressure on the community. If the pressure is on the community, like everybody is contributing, so don't overburden the community with paying more than their value. Because what's going to happen if you're going to pay $100,000 a Jew instead of $10,000, which is the going rate, it's going to be too much. You have to also worry about the Jewish people, the financial, economic situation for them. Or the Gemara says, maybe it's another reason. Or perhaps it's because of number B. The result of this will be that they will not seize and bring additional captives. We don't want these people, these pirates, to get a big incentive to go capture Jews. And more Jews will be in danger. If these pirates know that every Jew is worth $100,000, they're not going to bother with capturing Goyim. They'll go capture Jews. Each Jew is $100,000. And therefore, Jews are in danger. And Jews are at risk. Sometimes in captivity, a person could die. Sometimes he's not treated properly, of course. He could be sexually abused, or she could be sexually abused. So we don't want terrorists running after Jews. So don't pay more than the going rate. We're trading like everybody else. You capture a boy, you get, he's worth $10,000 on the slave market. You capture a Jew, he's worth $10,000. We'll redeem him. That's the idea. Now, these two reasons are important. Why? Because if you hold, like number A here, that is because of the community, then a person, let's say Uncle Joe gets captured, and his relatives get together. It's not on the community. His relatives get together and they say, we need to save Uncle Joe. And these pirates, they want $100,000. Well, Uncle Joe's worth it, right? So the family gets together and they raise the money and they ransom Uncle Joe. Did they violate the halacha? Well, if the reason is because Tikkun Olam is number A, then they didn't violate anything because they didn't put any pressure on the community. They did it themselves. But if the reason is number B, that it's going to encourage the pirates to go after Jews, and the Jewish people are going to be in danger, then they did something wrong. So keep that in mind. We will be discussing, is A right or is B right? The Gemara immediately tries to solve this problem. Is it A or is it B? And they bring the Levi Bar Darga story. The Gemara suggests, this is a continuation of the Gemara, come in here and answer based on the fact that Levi Bar Darga redeemed his daughter, who was taken captive with 13,000 gold dinars. There was a very rich guy. His name was Levi Bar Darga. His daughter was captured. He redeemed her for 13,000 gold dinars. Well, maybe that proves something. Maybe that proves whether it's A or B. Right? Continue. This indicates that private citizens may pay excessive sums to redeem a captive if they so choose. Why? Because it's not putting any financial pressure on the community. Therefore, it must be that the reason for the ordinance was to avoid an excessive burden being placed upon the community. If the ordinance was instituted to remove incentive for kidnappers to capture Jews, a private citizen would also not be permitted to pay an excessive sum. Right? So they bring the story of Levi Bar Darga. Maybe that shows what the reason was. Here we have a story, and it seems to imply that the reason is A, up here, the financial pressure of the community. It's in red, right? That's the reason. But then the Gemara rejects that idea. We continue. Abai said, and who told us that he acted in accordance with the wishes of the sages? Perhaps he acted against the wishes of the sages, and this anecdote cannot serve as a proof. This is what Abai said. Abai pushed the whole story aside. Usually when a tzaddik, a Tana, let's say Rabbi Akiva or Shimon ben Gamliel, they do something, the Gemara takes it as if it's halacha. This tzaddik actually does something, everybody sees it, he doesn't have to say the halacha, he acts the halacha, and we take it as a very strong proof that that's the halacha. But this Levi Bar Darga, he was just a stum Jew. Who knows if he did right? Who knows if he did according to the wishes of the Chachamim? So therefore, that's no proof. We don't learn anything from the Levi Bar Darga story, Abaye says. So now we're left with the question, is it A or is it B? Okay. The Rishonim come along and they determine the halacha for you based on all types of their understanding, and that's what we're going to go to now. From the Gemara, you cannot determine if it's A or B. So what did I decide to do here? Let's go to the Shulchan Aruch. Now, before we go to the Shulchan Aruch, I want to show you and explain to you how the Shulchan Aruch determined the halacha. And the Shulchan Aruch determined the halacha based on three Rishonim. A Rishon was a great Talmid Chacham that lived between a year 1000 to 1500. That includes Rashi, Rambam, Rif, the Rosh, the Mordechai, the Rashba. These people lived in that time period. We have tremendous respect for these tzaddikim and Talmidei Chachamim who lived during this time, who were outstanding in Torah. What did the Shulchan Aruch do? He says, listen, and he explains this in his introduction to the Beit Yosef. I will determine the halacha based on three pillars: the Rosh, the Rif, and the Rambam. Let's see how he explains himself. We go to the next page. We're now on page 3. Source 7a. Introduction to the Beit Yosef. Therefore, I decided, being that the three pillars of halachic decisors that the house of Israel leans on for their halachic instructions, they are the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh. Zal. These three pillars, these three Rishonim, the Beit Yosef considered the three most important Rishonim during that period, and therefore, he said, I will base my halachic decisions on them. He says more. He says it would be too much for him to read all the Rishonim, and even if he did, he'd have to decide. And so basically, he's going 2 out of 3. That's his general rule. If 2 out of 3 pasken a certain way, he will go that way. I decided in a place where 2 of them out of 3 agree to one view, we will decide the halacha according to them, except in a small amount of cases where all the sages or the majority argue on that opinion. So, for example, if you have 2 out of 3, but what happens is all the rest of the Rishonim argue on those 2, then he will go according to the majority of the Rishonim. And due to that, a minhag opposite to the ruling of the majority, which is the 2 out of 3, spread throughout Israel. And we see there's a minhag opposite of what the majority of these 3 say. And you have the Chachamim, the other Rishonim argue on them. So then he will go according to the majority and the way the minhag is in Israel. Some people don't like what the Beit Yosef wrote here, because we usually don't decide halacha that way. We usually decide halacha based on reasoning and intellect. And if a posek's intellect tells him, and he looks at all the sources and he studies all the sources, he determines the halacha is this way, it doesn't matter if the majority are against him. He goes that way. He has to go according to his reasoning. Digressing a little bit, but in the days of the Sanhedrin, there were 71. And they would start the discussion with the one who was the lowest on the totem pole. He would express his opinion first. And then the next one up expressed his opinion. And the next one up expressed his opinion. Till they got to the top, the Gadol Ador, the head of the Sanhedrin, would then express his opinion. We did not want the Gadol Ador to express his opinion first, because that would influence the other ones. Well, who am I if I go against the Gadol Ador? No, we want everybody, according to their reasoning, according to their logic and intellect, to determine the halacha based on how they see it. I continue. So now we're going to take these 3 great pillars and let's see what they said the halacha is. We already saw the Mishnah. Now we're on source 8, the Rif. Isaac ben Yaakov Alfasi HaKohen, he lived from 1013 to 1103. I have these in order. This is the earliest of the three of the Rishonim. Now the Rif is interesting because what he did is he took the Gemara and he chopped out a lot of the discussions, and he just, in the back of the Gemara, he just wrote the section of the Gemara that is the halacha. And he left out all the stories, and he left out all the pilpul and the discussions. Wasn't interested in that. He wanted to write a halachic book following the Gemara. So you can look at the Rif, you know what the halacha is because he tells you. It's a much more concise version, and if you want to go through all of Shas, you can go through the Rif and get the main principles. I read. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, one does not redeem captives at more than their value for the betterment of the world. It's a quote from the Mishnah, and so is the halacha. This is the halacha. We do not redeem prisoners for more than their worth. Then we go to the next pillar of Rishonim, the Rambam Zal. He lived a little bit later, 1138 to 1204. And he writes in his Mishnah Torah, we do not redeem captives for more than their worth, for the benefit of the world at large. Tikkun Olam. It's the same thing as the Mishnah. That's the policy. Why? And he holds like reason B, so that enemies will not pursue people to hold them captive. We don't want Jews to be pursued and to be captured. And we don't want to encourage the enemy to do that. By the way, the Rif also holds the same way, but I didn't bring all the sources to show you that. He holds the same idea, but he holds for reason B. Now we're on source 10, the Rosh, the next pillar that the Rav Yosef Karo brings. Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel, he lived a little later, 1250 to 1328. He quotes the Mishnah. Captives are not redeemed for more than their actual monetary value for the betterment of the world. Tikkun Olam. And he continues, and in the same vein, he says, we do not buy looted Torah, books, tefillin, and mezuzah for more than their value for the betterment of the world. The same idea applies. For example, somebody steals a pair of tefillin. Let's say a pair of tefillin is worth $600. And he's a thief, and he's selling the tefillin. We can pay $600. We don't pay more. We don't want to encourage him to steal tefillin. There's a story of a person who stole tefillin. He was selling it. So the Jew says, okay, yeah, I'm interested in buying. How much? So he says $600. So he looks at it, he pulls the tefillin out, and he says, wow, what's going on here? These don't match. The tefillin of the Rosh, they're not the same. What happened? You got the wrong, this is no good. He says, I'll give you $200. The guy took it. Sometimes Jews have brains. Okay. The Rosh continues. And he quotes the Gemara. A dilemma was raised before the sages with regard to this expression for the betterment of the world. Is it due A, to the financial pressure of the community? Or perhaps it is B. The result of this will be that they will not bring additional captives and seize them, as they will see that it's not worthwhile for them to take Jews captive. They won't focus on the Jews. He's just quoting the Gemara, basically. And then he brings the Levi Bar Daga story. Come in here and answer based on the fact that Levi Bar Daga redeemed his daughter, who was taken captive with 13,000 gold dinars. Abaye said, And who told us that he acted in accordance with the wishes of the sages? Perhaps he acted against the wishes of the sages, and this anecdote cannot serve as a proof. And then the Rosh says, and which of the two views was correct was not decided. The opinion of the Rosh is, I don't know which one of the two is the correct one. And then the Rosh continues. And he ends up by saying there are 4 exceptions to the rule. There are 4 times that you can redeem a captive for more than they're worth. Even though the Rambam does not say that, and the Rif does not say that, the Rosh does. And I'm going to read that to you. And this that we learned in Ketubot chapter Na'ara. If she, the wife, was taken captive and they were seeking ransom from her husband of up to 10 times her value, far more than the usual ransom for a captive of this kind, then on the first occasion that she is taken captive, he must redeem her because his wife is as important as his body. There is a section in the Gemara, there is an opinion in the Gemara that holds this, that if a wife is taken captive, husband has to redeem her, even much more than her value. The Rosh is bringing this down, and he says, this tells us that he has to redeem his wife even for more money than her value, and he has to do it, even if it's going to bankrupt him. That's his responsibility as a husband. Now, his wife is considered as himself because more than his daughter. So we're pushing that Levi Bardaga story out. No, you can't redeem your daughter for more than her worth, but a wife is different because a wife is like himself. Ishto kegufo. For himself, the rabbis did not institute a tikkun ulam law. If a person himself is captured and he happens to have $1 million worth of credit on his credit card, and he doesn't like sitting in jail being tortured, he's allowed, the rabbis say, or at least the Rosh is holding this way, that we don't expect him to be able to undergo torture and not give up his $1 million to save himself. Recently in Israel, there was a man called Amiram ben Uliel. He was accused of setting fire to a home in Duma, an Arab village. He is innocent, but they wanted to pin the charge on a hilltop youth, and they had a big fishing net, and they grabbed a lot of people, and until they decided, okay, we can pin it on him because his alibi is not as strong as the other alibis. They kept him in jail for over 20 days without seeing a lawyer and so on. He still kept saying, I'm innocent, I didn't do anything. Finally, they start torturing him here in the Israeli system. They call it enhanced interrogation. It means torture. After being tortured with excruciating pain, he said, I did it. As soon as they stopped torturing him, he said, I didn't do it. Then they tortured him again. So the point is that a man will do whatever he can to get out of torture. That's usually the way it works. They want him to confess a crime, he'll confess. So right now they sentenced him to 3 life sentences. Hopefully it's going to be appealed, God willing, and a lot of money needs to be raised to help this poor Jew, innocent man. I spoke to his wife, and I studied the case. A lot of discrepancies, and it's a big problem, and that's unfortunately what's going on today. And I continue, for a man will do everything he has for himself. That's the second exception. The third exception, a Torah scholar that was captured. The sages did not institute a law prohibiting this. His redemption for more than fair value, for it is a chapter of Nezikin. And we have a story in the Gemara. The Rav Yeshua redeemed a child that was captured with much money because he saw that he was sharp and witty, and it was possible that he would be a great scholar. Third case, Rav Yeshua, and we'll have to study this, and we're going to do that, God willing, next time. He saw a boy that he felt could be a big Talmid Chacham for Israel, and he redeemed him for a lot of money against the Tikkun Olam rules, and he became a great Talmid Chacham who taught Torah and gave psaks, halachic decisions in Israel. But then the Rosh says, and all the more so if he is already a Torah giant, a great scholar. Okay. So now, there are 4 exceptions to the rule. Number 1, himself, according to the Rosh, against the Rif and the Rambam. The Rif and the Rambam make no distinction. We have a rule. We don't redeem prisoners for more than they're worth because of Tikkun Olam. The Rif, the Rambam, they both say the same thing. The Rosh brings down 4 exceptions, and in another shiur, I want to go through each one of the 4 exceptions to explain how the Rosh came to that conclusion, because it's against the Rambam and the Rif. The Tur was the son of the Rosh, and he summarizes it for you. The Tur was Rav Yaakov ben Asher. He lived in the 1200s to 1343, 1269 to 1343. And what does he say? Captives are not redeemed for more than their actual monetary value, for the betterment of the world. Same thing as the Mishnah says. Why? And he quotes reason B, so that the enemies will not make great effort to capture them. Now, even though his father, the Rosh, said it's not decided, the Tur felt, yeah, it is decided. And so he paskened reason B. We don't want Jews to be easy victims. We're not encouraging pirates to run after, to focus on Jews because they can get $100,000 for each Jew. No, we're not going to do that. For the betterment of society, everybody is equal. Same price as a goy, same price in the slave market, the same price as a Jew. That's it. And he goes, and he says further, and even if the relatives want to redeem him more than their value, we do not let them. We will not let them redeem their relatives for more than their value. Uncle Joe has to sit in prison. We're not going to risk the community and the good of society because a few relatives of Uncle Joe want to pay $100,000 for him. But the Torah now mentions the 4 exceptions to this rule. 3 of them are quoted by the Shulchan Aruch. A man is liable to redeem himself for all that he wants. That's number 1, right? He can redeem himself. 2, and similarly his wife, for she is like himself. 3, a Torah sage. 4, and even one who is not a Torah sage, but we see him successful, it has potential, or he has potential that he will be a Torah sage. We can redeem him for all he is able to. A little garbled, got the idea. We can redeem him for more than his value. That's the Torah brings down the 4 exceptions that his father brought down. Now we go to the Shulchan Aruch. How does the Shulchan Aruch pasken? Now, interesting enough, the Shulchan Aruch is not going 2 out of 3 here, which is usual rule. Why? because he brings down exceptions when the Rif and the Rif and the Rambam did not bring down any exceptions to this rule. Let's look at it. Captives. Captives are to be redeemed at more than their value for the safety of society, are not to be ransomed. Okay, they're not to be ransomed. He's quoting the Mishnah. He's quoting everybody. Otherwise, the enemies would exert every effort to capture victims. In yellow, that is reason B. The same reason the Rambam said, the Tur said, the Rif said, but I didn't have it quoted there. And the Rosh said, I don't know what is the actual reason. Again, the enemies would exert every effort to capture victims if we don't have this Tikkun Olam rule. Then he lists the exceptions. But a man may ransom himself at any price. Number one. So also a scholar should be ransomed at a greater price, or even a student who gives promise of becoming a great scholar. But he mentions right now 3 out of 4. And as to whether one's wife is considered another or oneself, you can see Ibn Ha'ezer where he brings that down and he says, no, a husband is not obligated. If he wants to, though, it's complicated a little bit. Basically, he says a husband is not obligated to redeem his wife for more than her value, but it's because of the wording is not so clear. He could if he wants. At least that is the way the Ramah also says. And the Gra goes further and says if he could, if he's allowed to, then he must. Okay. So that's the way the Shulchan Aruch paskins. 13. Now I'd like to talk about Professor Robert Oman. I had the privilege of hearing him speak 12 years ago in Kadumim. They inaugurated a new branch of the college over there. And he spoke. And he basically showed that Mishnah on a big slide that you're not allowed to redeem captives for more than they're worth. What's interesting is Professor Oman is obviously a religious Jew. He is an expert in game theory. He won the Nobel Prize in 2005 for game theory. What is game theory? Game theory is the study of how people, if you have a group of people, if one does one thing, how will other people react? If you have 100 nations and one nation does something, how's that going to affect other nations? It's a very complicated, you can get very complicated with this, and he won the Nobel Prize. And he comes to Kadumim and he says, releasing terrorists is insane. It actually makes no sense. It's dangerous for society. It's obvious, right? But he is, and he says, not only that, that's what halacha is. That's the halacha. I'm going to read it. Oman's position on the ransom of captives is based not only on his understanding of rabbinic sources, but on his expertise in game theory, which he won a Nobel Prize in 2005. The analysis of the situation, according to game theory, Oman explained, coincides with the position of the sages of the Talmud and Maimonides, who determined that a captive should not be redeemed for more than his or her worth in order to assure a functioning society. Here's a man who's an expert on psychology and game theory. Now, number 14. After getting this far, what's interesting to know Is it possible that everything I said before, this whole shear, has nothing to do with Gilad Shalit and the releasing of 1,027 terrorists? That all the halacha I brought has nothing to do with it. This is not that case that we're talking about. That's not what the Mishnah is talking about. I want to explain. None of the above may apply to Gilad Shalit. The Rav Hutner Zal, the hijacking. Rav Hutner. Now, some of this came to light 50 years ago. Rav Hutner was on an airplane with his son-in-law, with two of his students, flying on a TWA flight from Tel Aviv to New York. He just spent part of the summer in Eretz Israel. He was the Rosh Hashiva of Chaim Berlin in New York. His plane was hijacked by PFLP, Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine. They took the plane to Amman, Jordan. They demanded the release of all their prisoners in Israel. And I assume also around the world. That was their goal. They immediately let all the non-Jews off the plane. Now all they had on the plane were Jews. After a week, they agreed to let all the women and children go. What was left were 40 Jews, including Rav Hutner. They somehow realized that he was an important Jew, so they isolated him from the others. They were negotiating. Well, I don't know. They were negotiating. They wanted all their prisoners released from Israel. Their students, his students, and his friends were obviously very, very, and all the Jewish people were very, very upset and disturbed. And his students started raising money. We'll ransom him for whatever it takes. Because as you saw before, according to the Rosh and the Torah, redeeming a Talmud Chacham, you have an exception to the rule, right? You can redeem him for much more than his value because it's too important to the Jewish people. We can't let him sit there. They raised a lot of money. They went to the State Department of the United States, and they said, we're prepared to offer a huge amount of money for the release of Rabbi Hutner. They had a meeting of Aguda committee, and we'll get to that soon, to discuss the issue. I'm going to keep you in suspense to what happened. So now we're going to go straight to Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zal. He was a Rosh Yeshiva in the Mesivta of Torah V'dat, where my father attended, from 1948 to 1968. And he had a lot of courage because he went against the mainstream and he said, no, you cannot redeem Rav Hutner. Let's read it. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky voiced his opinion that under these circumstances, the heter to release a Talmud Chacham cannot be used He argued that the hijacking was considered halachically an act of war, falling under the halachic definition of milchemet mitzvah, a war which one has a mitzvah to fight in, and even give his life if necessary. So Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky says, no, this is not a normal situation. This is not what the Mishnah is talking about. This is war. And you can't have a war and somebody captures somebody and then all of a sudden you can hand over whatever they want to redeem the guy. It's ridiculous. We're in the middle of a war. We have to win the war. And if we start giving the terrorists money or anything, we're hurting the war effort. This is not a simple case of pirates stealing a bunch of people and for economic reasons and trying to make a little money. No. Herschel Schachter, one of the poskim at Yeshiva University, so he summed up what Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky stated. So I want to read it because I think it's important. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky dissented, however, arguing that the mitzvah of Pidyon Shvuyim only applies in peacetime, but surely not during hostilities, when the delivery of ransom money to the enemy would strengthen their position. You don't want to help the enemy. He continued to explain that although a ceasefire existed at the time, the 1948 War of Independence had never really ended. You know, we're still in a battle. We're still in a war. It started in 1948 and it didn't end. Sometimes there's lulls in the war, but really this is an ongoing war. They have not accepted us. They have not made peace with us. Really? Or the Arabs avowed bold to destroy the state of Israel and drive the Jews into the sea had never been renounced. One could argue that now we have a peace treaty with Egypt or we have a peace treaty with Jordan. The question is it really a peace treaty? Our peace treaty with Jordan is very fragile. When those 4 rabbis were murdered in Har Nof, butchered and beheaded in Har Nof in a Netz Minyan, the Parliament of Jordan rose up for a minute of silence, not for the victims, but for the terrorists that were killed. This is the peace treaty we have with Jordan. When Sadat came to make the peace treaty with Jordan, he had a tie on with a swastika on his tie. Swastikas. If you want, I'll send you the picture. Anyway, in his view, although Israel was not then engaged in active battle, in the eyes of the halacha, it was considered to be experiencing a mere lull in the ongoing original 1948 War of Independence. First of all, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky gets a lot of credit. A lot of people, they're very worried. They want to get Rav Hutner out. They want to get Rav Hutner out. They want to get Rav Hutner out. We have to do something. We have to do something. He came against the mainstream and said, no, we can't get him out. It's against the halakha. Pidyon Shvuyim does not apply in wartime, only in peacetime. Next opinion, Rav Shmuel Eliyahu. Rav Shmuel Eliyahu, the Rav of Tzfat, has a different take on the whole situation. Similarly, he says the Mishnah is not talking about this case. The Mishnah is talking about money, right? The Mishnah is talking about pirates capture people. They're trying to make some money. They sell people on the slave market. That's not what the case this is about. We're talking, you're releasing terrorists. You're trying to save 1 or 2 or 3 people who are in captivity and risking the entire nation in the process, as we see before our very eyes. They saved Gilad Shalit. 10 Jews already had to pay the price, and I'm not even talking about those that were injured in all these bombings and attacks. And so I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the people that were maimed for life. I'm talking about death, murder. So fine, you saved Gilad Shalit, but what did you do? You caused murder among the people. These people, what is their money? They don't want money. They want to kill more Jews, and they want their freedom fighters released. He says this is not the case of the Mishnah. And I end off his tshuva, which I quote here. But a community cannot ransom a prisoner who is one member of the community when it will cause serious damage to other members of the community. You're not allowed to harm other people in the process. And you remember the 179 faces that you saw. All were murdered by released terrorists. So he says this is not a case of Pidyon Shvuyim. Rav Dov Lior. Rav Dov Lior is talking about the current situation. Right now, in a Hamas captivity, he speaks regarding the present deal on the table for two dead soldiers, Hadar Golden and Sergeant Oran Shaul, that were murdered in August of 2014 during a ceasefire. That's right. We had a ceasefire with Hamas, and these two soldiers, with their team, they radioed in for help. They saw enemy soldiers behind a wall, and they said, listen, we need artillery fire. We need to blow these people up. What do you think the Israeli army replied? No, we have a ceasefire. We're not allowed to shoot. These people came and they killed Hadar Golden and Oran Shaul in the middle of a ceasefire. Hamas doesn't follow the rules. Even the rules of war, they don't follow. They're out to kill. So Hamas now has two dead soldiers. And they also have two citizens. Both of them a little bit, they say, mentally unstable. One is Avera Mengistu. He's an Ethiopian. And Hisham al-Sayed, a Bedouin from the Negev. They got two dead soldiers, two Israeli citizens. And as of a few months ago, it was reported that the Israeli negotiating team is prepared to release prisoners once again for these people. A whole shira should be done on what is the policy of redeeming dead bodies. I know it's very nice that they should have a nice cemetery somewhere, but I trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu that for Tzchiyat HaMeitim, he will redeem them from wherever they are. And that we should actually endanger Jewish lives by releasing terrorists for dead bodies. I can't even tell you them. Can't even explain. Rav Lior here says, listen, this is a question. He goes back to Pidyon Shvuyim. He quotes the Mishnah. We don't redeem captives for more than their value. Okay, and therefore he ends up by saying there is a halacha here, a pikuch nefesh of the entire community. Rav Moshe Feinstein Zal. Rav Moshe Feinstein was the head of Aguda in his time, and the Aguda council got together. We need to say Rav Hutner. We need to say Rav Hutner. We need to say Rav Hutner. And Rav Moshe, and they discussed it. I don't have the meetings of the minutes of the meeting. Don't have it. We know that Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky spoke against it. In my mind, in my personal opinion, unfortunately, they wrote this letter that Rav Moshe Feinstein signed on as the head. I guess this was the decision of the group. And it was penned in Hebrew. I can send you the original if you want. And he wrote the following. An urgent meeting of the Rabbinic Council held a solemn discussion about the dangerous state of the captives in Jordan and the difficulty of the state of Israel to reach a decision in the matter. I don't know if it was so hard. They weren't releasing any terrorists. In the days of Golda Meir and her cabinet, they were not going to release any prisoners. No deal with terrorists. So we saw fit to express our opinion, the opinion of the Torah on this matter. In Jewish law, saving a life takes precedence. If there is no choice, meaning you can't rescue these people, the state of Israel must comply with the terrorist demands to save the hostages' lives. May God protect his people and may the Jewish people live in peace. Rav Moshe Feinstein, president of the Rabbinic Council. This is the letter he sent to Golda Meir. He sent this letter. Well, first of all, if you remember, they were raising a lot of money and they went to the State Department. The State Department told them, listen, we do not negotiate with terrorists. And that stopped the campaign to raise money because the State Department was against it and they were not going to cooperate at all with giving money over to these terrorists. So that ended that. Rav Moshe Feinstein sent this letter to Golda Meir. I'm not sure exactly when she got it, but she did not release any terrorists. The British government decided they would step in and negotiate with the terrorists. He blames Israel for not lifting not lift a finger, let's say. Yeah, they wouldn't lift a finger. They didn't want to help in any way, Israel. That's what the British said. Israel's not helping in any way to solve this captive problem. So he started negotiating with them, and he was able to get Switzerland to release. It was 2 or 3 PFLP members. England themselves released 1 PFLP member who was involved in another terrorist hijacking. So altogether, they got a few. Israel did not release any. All the captives were released from the plane. They were flown to Cyprus and eventually back to New York, right in time for Rosh Hashanah. So thank God Golda Meir was strong and no prison. So the PFLP did not get what they want. They originally wanted all their political prisoners free. What exactly Rav Moshe Feinstein's position himself was, I don't know. Although he did say that it would not be fair it would not be appropriate to raise money to release Rav Hutner without releasing everybody on the plane. He did say that. His tshuva is in Rishumei Aharon Chelik Bet Amud Chet. It's not in his normal Ikeret Moshe, so I haven't been able to track down this tshuva yet, but I'm kind of interested, and I'm going to look for it, God willing, and then I'll have more to say. That concludes the shir for tonight.